Howdy-ho, Andrew here. Welcome to the Onion Buns and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk. So, we live in interesting times, and we live in times that it appears our media and our politicians have absolutely no integrity whatsoever. None. They will lie to get their propaganda across. And we just saw that here in Canada via Doug Ford and Mark Carney taking the Ronald Reagan tariff speech about Japan and hacking it to pieces and piecing it together. They took a piece here and they took a piece here and they took a piece here and they put it all together and they completely changed the message. And the Reagan Society is pissed. They are pissed, which spurred Trump on to say, yeah, I'm done. I'm not talking to you guys anymore. If that's how you're doing politics, if that's how you're going to negotiate, I'm not talking to you and I'm going to raise your tariffs on Canada by 10%. So good job, Mark Carney and Doug Ford. But then the BBC, not to be outdone, said, hey, we can go one better. And they did the exact same thing, but they did it with a Trump speech. So now Trump is threatening to sue him, and the BBC actually came out with an apology today, which has me a little bit confused because if they are apologizing and admitting they actually did what they've been accused of doing, which they did in the apology, does that not open them up for a massive slander lawsuit? Like, I'm not a lawyer, so maybe if there's a lawyer out there, you can answer this, but I'm not a lawyer, but it just seems to me that admitting you did the crime opens you up civilly. Huge. Like I said, I'm not a lawyer. That's just my layman interpretation of it. But yeah, you're seeing the headline right now of the BBC apologizing. So we don't get a lot of coverage on the BBC or Europe here in Canada. Hell, we don't get a lot of coverage on Canada by our media unless it's pushing their own propaganda. You know, I get most of my news from YouTube now. I don't bother watching the mainstream media. I'll get clips in that and I'll use clips in my videos. But honestly, I don't watch CBC, CTV, Global. I don't read Globe and Mail. I don't read, well, I've never read the Toronto Red Star since the 70s, you know, and I don't watch any of the affiliates because they're all full of horse bleep. They give you like this 20% of the story. Because, well, they're doing exactly what the BBC did or what Doug Ford and Mark Carney did, is they take the whole story and they cut out about 80% of it and they only give you about 20% of the story, that 20% that suits their agenda. And that's not news, people. That's propaganda. That's textbook propaganda. So when something happens in Europe or Australia or China or, you know, anywhere outside of Canada and the US, I look at broadcasters from those regions to cover it. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to run you a video from Sky News covering the BBC debacle. And yeah, you can come gather with what you will from it. But it doesn't look good for the BBC. And if the BBC goes down, mark my words, CBC is not far behind here in Canada because CBC bases itself off of what the BBC does. That's how they conduct themselves. And, you know, if the BBC's going down for it, CBC won't be too far behind. Somebody will pull the plug on the CBC. Polyev wants to literally pull the plug, but I'm saying somebody will start suing the BBC or the CBC for incorrect reporting, for leaving out material facts. And yeah, Justin Trudeau changed the media laws a few years ago where it's actually legal for the CBC now to lie. No, I'm not joking, people. Trudeau actually put through that bill. So, and the NDP supported it, so it got through. So yeah, the mainstream media in Canada is absolutely allowed to lie. And they have been for a number of years, and they've been utilizing that to full extent. It couldn't have been any more clear in the last election, federal election. But that doesn't cover them from civil liability if they harm somebody's reputation or speak falsehoods about them. So I would not be surprised if the BBC debacle carries through to CBC, CTV, and others, like they will have to actually start becoming reporters. And that would be that would be a welcome change of pace. But I'm not holding my breath that ever happens unless we get rid of the Liberal government. Too much money involved. Like the CBC gets 1.5 billion with a B per year from the Liberal government. And the Liberal government just in this budget, if it goes through, just upped it by another 150, $200 million a year. So like there's big money for the CBC to stay as the state propaganda outlet for the Liberals. CTV and them, they share in a lesser pool, but it's still 600 million every year divvied up between chosen media outlets. Who chooses it? The Liberals. So it's literally just paying off media to carry water for the Liberals and tell their lies. That's all it is. So, but that's 600 million. So you think about that. That's Canada pays out over $2 billion a year to ensure that we don't have honest, fully encompassing reporting. That's not democracy. That's not free society, people. Those are state broadcasters. We saw this in Yahtzee, Germany, just before Hitler took over lost his mind and attacked the world. This is what he did, is he closed down all of the media outlets and he only allowed the mainstream media outlets that ran his propaganda to exist. It's the same principle. It's a little different. The Liberals are doing it through money, taxpayer money. Hitler did it through intimidation and force, but it's the same outcome. It's the same ends. So anyway, let's get to the Sky News media report and see what's going on with the BBC.
The BBC has come under a lot of fire. It's facing $1 billion legal threat, a leadership crisis, and heavy public scrutiny. There are so many unanswered questions about the corporation's future. So how did we get here? And what happens next?
Some breaking news coming into us here at Sky regarding the BBC. We are hearing that BBC Director General Tim Davie and the CEO of News, Deborah Turness, have resigned.
This was a moment that caught many in the media off guard. Journalists had been aware of growing tension inside the BBC, but few expected that we'd see two of its top bosses quit on the same night.
I don't know if it's growing tension, so they would know better than me, because again, I'm Canadian. I don't get a lot of the European news. But when I read this story, it seemed to me that these two, they resigned because they approved the lie. And they knowingly approved the lie. They allowed their reporters to manipulate footage to change the message. As I said, exactly what Mark Carney and Doug Ford did on the Reagan telecast about Japan tariffs, is they manipulated the video. And like nowadays, anyone can do that. Like I could take a Doug Ford interview and you should see what I could make him say with his own words just by creative editing. But I don't do that because that is immoral. And honestly, it should be illegal. You should have to play the whole clip, not just choose parts, move them around, and change the message. I don't know. If you don't see anything wrong with that, then you and I are very different, because I see that, and I don't care if it's right wing doing it, left wing doing it, whoever. It's immoral, and it should be illegal. And if you think it's okay because it's the left wing doing it, you are part of the problem. Make no mistake about it.
A statement released tonight, Mr. Davie has said, "I wanted to let you know that I have decided to leave the BBC after 20 years. This is entirely my decision, and I remain very thankful to the chair and board for their unswerving and unanimous support throughout my entire tenure, including during recent days."
Accusations that the BBC executive had not been dealing properly with issues when they came to light
have really called into question those basic tenets of what the BBC stands for: trust and accountability.
Remember that if you're talking about impartiality, there is also the other side of the spectrum.
That could threaten the future
future of the BBC there.
It all started with this front page by The Telegraph on the 4th of November, quoting a leaked internal memo they'd gotten hold of, written by Michael Prescott, an advisor to the BBC's Editorial Standards Committee, who'd left that role in June. He raised concerns about institutional bias over Gaza, gender identity, and the subject that got the most pickup, Donald Trump.
Exactly what we're facing with Canadian media. Exactly what the US is facing with MSNBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. Left-wing media is no longer media. Now, I'm not sticking up for Fox News. They're just as bad. But the one thing I'll say about Fox News is they pay for themselves. They don't get government money. They don't get government funding. The outlets that seem to be the most corrupt on this all receive government funding. The BBC, the CTV, CBC, CTV, Global, Globe and Mail, Toronto Red Star. In the States, you had the MSNBC, CNN, and PBS. You know, it always seems to be it's the left-wing media outlets that receive government funding that are guilty of this. You know, like I said, I'm not sticking up for Fox News. They're just as bad as CNN, but on the opposite side of the spectrum. But their one saving grace is they don't take public money. That's really the separation between them and all these other ones. If all these other ones stop taking public money, well, first off, the CBC would not exist here in Canada if it did not take taxpayer dollars, because it's got no viewership. It doesn't turn a profit. It's corrupt throughout its entire organization. And without the 1.5, 1.6, 1.7 billion dollars a year, it ceases to exist. So, but yeah, it's like, this is a real problem. It seems to be an entitlement, entrenched entitlement of the left wing.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol, and I'll be there with you, and we fight. We fight like hell.
That's where this episode of Panorama comes in, which spliced up Trump's speech ahead of the Capitol Hill riot, sandwiching together two bits of audio recorded over 50 minutes apart. Right-leaning commentators, media outlets, and politicians like former Prime Minister Boris Johnson were furious, framing it as proof of a long-suspected bias against Conservatives. And news of high-level resignations were met with delight from the US president, who posted this.
The top people in the BBC, including Tim Davie, the boss, are all quitting/fired because they were caught doctoring my very good speech of January 6th. These are very dishonest people who tried to step on the scales of a presidential election.
As this all unfolded, one of the biggest questions was why nobody from the BBC had responded to the articles battering the corporation.
It's not just that the Trump video was faked. It was the fact that Mr. Davey and Ms. Turners knew that it was faked for the last 6 months, and they did nothing about it. They remained silent. And that's just completely unacceptable.
When News CEO Deborah Turness came into work the morning after she'd announced she was off, she said this.
I would like to say it has been the privilege of my career to serve as the CEO of BBC News and to work with our brilliant team of journalists. I stepped down over the weekend because the buck stops with me. But I'd like to make one thing very clear. BBC News is not institutionally biased. That's why it's the world's most trusted news provider. And if you'd excuse me,
why did you fail to deal with the mistakes that were made?
And see my teams. Thank you so much.
Notice she won't answer any questions. She's got her prepared statement. This is part of the problem. If you are really doing a mea culpa and saying the buck stops with me, take the questions, explain yourself. But we see this time and time again with these types. They just have their prepared statements. They don't take take questions. They don't give answers. You know, Carney does this all the time when he's out doing public speaking. He only takes approved questions from approved media outlets. In other words, the state broadcasters, propaganda outlets, and they're all pre-screened questions. Rarely do you see Carney get a unscreened question, and when he does, you can tell by his face he's not happy about it. He's really quite angry about it.
There was more to this story than meets the eye. And on the Monday, we learnt this. Sky News understands that Deborah Turnus had wanted to get a statement out early last week, but was blocked by the BBC board, which was arguing over the wording. Now, some of the BBC's own journalists have gone on the record to say what we're actually seeing play out now goes back much further than the last week, with claims that within the BBC there are those who have systematically set out to undermine Tim Davie and his senior leadership for a long time now, a coup being the implication from within the BBC board.
How can it be a coup? They lied, they got caught lying, they got punished. Where's the coup? The person doing the wrongdoing was Tim Davies and his group. Those calling him out are not the people to fault.
The name Sir Robbie Gibb coming up a lot. He's a former Downing Street communications director turned BBC board member who helped launch GB News. His appointment to the board in 2021 was supported by Conservative figures who viewed him as someone who could challenge what they saw as a liberal bias from within the corporation. When Davie finally returned to the office on Tuesday, he had a 45-minute video call with his staff.
I do hear everyone when we have to be very clear and stand up for our journalism. We are a unique and precious organisation. And I see the free press, I see the weapon under pressure, I see the weaponisation. I think we've got to fight for our journalism. I'm really proud of our work, and the amazing work locally, globally that we're doing is utterly precious. We have made some mistakes that have cost us, but we need to fight for that.
When questioned on rumours of an alleged coup, BBC Chair Samir Shah, who'd been sat next to him on that call, said he wasn't a believer in conspiracy theories. If Shah and Davie were hoping to leave the coup talk at that, it didn't work. I'm told staff who'd submitted questions about the alleged plotter-in-chief, board member Sir Robbie Gibb, became so frustrated that their questions were being vetted and not shown to everyone that out of desperation they started writing their questions into the comment boxes that were public, just to let it be known their concern about political influence at the top. A screenshot sent to Sky News anonymously showed staff were enraged about what might have been going on behind the scenes. Former senior insiders say the BBC's problems aren't just in the boardroom.
I think we're now seeing that there was, of course, the leaks to the Telegraph, and some of the campaigning inside the BBC probably does have a degree of political motivation. But then,
well, we know this in Canada. The BBC was instrumental in helping Mark Carney get elected. They acted as state propaganda outlets from Europe for Mark Carney. The BBC has been instrumental in pushing a ultra alt-left extremist ideology for quite a while. Now, don't get me wrong, I like some of the BBC shows. Maybe not so much recently, but in the 80s and 90s, there was a number of shows out of the BBC that I quite enjoyed. TV shows, not their news. Their news, well, I did watch it from time to time, has always been very left-wing, very slanted, not very nonpartisan. There's always been that left-wing partisanship to it. But I always gave them a pass because, like I said, I enjoyed some of their shows, which is the difference from the CBC here in Canada, because I can't stand the CBC shows. They're absolute crap. So you have a channel that has absolute crap, is 100% funded by taxpayer money, and is a left-wing state propaganda outlet. I don't see the value in that. So I view the CBC as worse than the BBC, but the BBC news department, it's always been biased. It's always been pro-left-wing. And anyone claiming it's not is lying.
equally, we know this year that Lisa Nandy, the Labour Culture Secretary, seemed at one point to be trying to get Tim Davie fired. And the fact is the BBC always has these political cross-currents, and it's got to withstand them.
In the Commons, Culture Secretary Lisa Nandy said this.
Those in this House attacking the BBC from left and right for not expressing views they agree with should consider just what is at stake. There is a fundamental difference between raising serious concerns over editorial failings and members of this House launching a sustained attack on the institution itself. Because the BBC is not just a broadcaster, it is a national institution that belongs to us all.
Well, now we know where the liberal talking points came from the CBC, because you hear this from the liberals almost word for word. The exact same rhetoric. I got an idea, guys. How about you just report the news? No left wing, no right wing, no spin. You report the entire story, you inform your viewership, and you let your viewership decide where they stand. It's not up to you to influence them, manipulate them, indoctrinate them. Just report the news. Report it all. Both sides, and equal time, equal presence, and then let the viewer decide. You know, I guarantee you if CBC, CTV, Global did that, they would not be having financial hardships right now. But they don't do that. Therefore, they're constantly under attack here in Canada, and the same for BBC in the UK. If it just reported the news and left the politics to the politicians, I guarantee you, nobody would be saying boo about them. And I guarantee you would not have these stories where they're caught red-handed, editing, manipulating, lying on film and video and type.
The government has seemed keen to show their support for the corporation itself. Tim Davies' days were arguably numbered before this. In truth, journalists like myself have spent more time here at New Broadcasting House over the last couple of years than we have in the last decade. As Director Generals go, Davie, in his 5 years in charge, had deflected so many stories away that the tabloids had given him the nickname Teflon Tim. He'd perfected the art of strategic invisibility and presided over some major missteps. Within his first year, the BBC had to apologise over Martin Bashir's world-famous interview with Princess Diana in 1995. In April 2024, news presenter Hugh Edwards resigned from the BBC on medical advice. However, Davie was later forced to defend not sacking him after learning of his child abuse images arrest the year prior. Earlier this year, UK media regulator Ofcom ruled the BBC committed a serious breach of broadcasting rules by failing to disclose that the narrator of a documentary about Gaza was the son of a Hamas official. And in July, the broadcaster issued an apology over its coverage of Bob Vylan's live performance at Glastonbury, saying, "We deeply regret that such offensive and deplorable behaviour appeared on the BBC." Also that month, MasterChef hosts Greg Wallace and John Turode were sacked following an inquiry into Wallace's alleged misconduct, which Davie said should be seen as a chance for the corporation to have a reset and make sure that people are living up to the values we expect across the board. If resignations and rumours of a coup weren't bad enough for the BBC, of course there was also a legal letter sent on behalf of President Donald Trump saying he was so enraged by how his speech was doctored, he was considering suing the BBC for $1 billion. Litigation perhaps to be expected given Trump's history of suing news organisations, having previously settled a defamation case against ABC and a legal dispute with CBS News. Howard Stringer is a former president of CBS News and a former BBC board member.
You should know when you're dealing with a president, as I did, because I had problems with President Reagan and President Nixon, you've got to be very careful with presidents. They have an army of lawyers behind them. So in your pursuit of your story, truth and fairness must come first. So
listen to him. When you're dealing with presidents, truth and fairness must come first. No, asshole. Truth and fairness must come first, period, for anyone. It doesn't matter if it's a president or a homeless peon on the street. Tell the frickin' truth. Be fair. Be complete. Let the viewers come to their own conclusions, armed with all the facts. He just admitted that they don't tell you the whole story. He says, oh, well, we have to be careful dealing with presidents because they can come back and sue us. But everybody else, they don't have that type of resources. So we can lie through our, well, he's got British teeth. You can't see it in this picture, but he's got the British teeth, all right. So there's lots of gaps there to lie through. Like, this is the problem with the modern mainstream media, is they don't think telling the truth, being fair, being honest is part of their mantra anymore. They think it is their job to indoctrinate you, manipulate you, mold your opinion around their beliefs. Again, that's not journalism. That is indoctrination. That is propaganda. and it should not exist in any free society.
If you don't get it right, you'll pay a price.
The BBC responded to that deadline by apologising, promising not to broadcast the Panorama episode again, but saying, while it sincerely regretted the manner in which the video clip was edited, we strongly disagree there is a basis for a defamation claim. For an organisation that's been paralysed by fear and internal division, this was a pivotal moment. Stand by its journalists, act decisively, or risk losing the reputation it's spent decades building. To compound the BBC's week from hell, then fresh allegations emerged that Newsnight had also made a similarly misleading edit of that Trump speech, which the corporation is now also having to look into. Now, steadying this ship will be a must, and with Tim Davie on his way out, the search for his successor is now officially underway. High-profile media figures such as Charlotte Moore of Sony Pictures, Jay Hunt of the British Film Institute, and Alex Mahon, formerly of Channel 4, have all been mentioned as potential contenders. The real question is, though, who would actually want the job? As the BBC navigates its financial future, liaising with the government ahead of its charter renewal in 2027, it faces the unenviable task of steadying an organisation that seems to be tearing itself apart. For a broadcaster whose foundations are built on trust and accountability, some serious missteps have been exposed. The person charged with cleaning up this mess, restoring order and guiding the BBC through the storm of culture war scrutiny will inherit a poisoned chalice. While everyone at the BBC might be desperately keen to move on, the drama continues. Staff here who are used to reporting the news, having to get used to being the story.
So there you go. It really doesn't strike me as that hard of a dilemma, if I'm being really honest about it. Tell the truth. Whoever takes over, just put down a mandate. You will report the whole story, or as the old saying goes, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help you God. And if you don't do that, you're fired. Just take a hard line. You report the whole story. You report the truth. Your personal opinion or agenda, it plays no part in reporting. That's not what reporting is. That's what editorials are. But editorials have to tell you up front, this is an editorial and it's my opinion. The nightly news is supposed to be about facts, just facts. No opinion, no bias, no agenda. Tell the truth. It really shouldn't be that hard, but in this day and age, telling the truth seems to be a really unpopular aspect to society. Like here in Canada, we have a pathological liar as a prime minister right now. Like, I have no fear saying that because I could go into court and prove it. It's that obvious. It's been proven time and time again. So even his state media propaganda outlets have called him, what was the term they used? Oh, geez, how did they put it? They put it as challenged with the truth sometimes, is how they put it. No, he's a liar. That's just the simple truth of the matter. Mark Carney lies. It's not slander if it's true. And this is what the media needs to understand is you can put out a negative report about somebody if it's true. And like with Donald Trump, it amazes me that they go to these great lengths to lie about him because I've never been a Donald Trump fan. I didn't like him when he was a beloved Democrat, and he was a beloved Democrat, make no doubt about it. They all try to act like he wasn't. He was for most of his adult life. I didn't like him when he was a C-grade celebrity. I got a couple chuckles out of the Apprentice show, especially when he took runs at Rosie O'Donnell, because, I absolutely frickin' despise that troll. And I don't like him as a Republican president. I take the position with Donald Trump that I judge him on individual acts. So sometimes I agree with him, sometimes I don't, but that never mistake that for actually liking the man. But Donald Trump is so abrasive in his natural personality, you don't have to make shit up about him. Just dig into him and you will find enough ammunition to talk bad about him if that is your goal. So you don't have to lie, you don't have to edit, you don't have to do any of that. But these guys, left-wingers, they're all left-wingers, be it Doug Ford or Mark Carney or BBC, they are so determined to find that smoking gun that they're trying to create a smoking gun, and then they get called out on it. And it's always the same. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I was just trying to do it for the people. The people. You know, like Doug Ford or Mark Carney has ever given a shit about the people. Like the BBC gives a shit about the people. They're all politicians. They're all pushing a radicalized extremist alt-left propaganda ideology. And that's what they're pushing. And it's got nothing to do with the people, the truth, honesty, fairness. And those are all just power words they misuse to try to make themselves look better than they really are. So yeah, that's my video for this week. It's like, I'm really happy that the BBC got caught. I have no delusions that this is going to change how media functions overnight, because it's taken a couple plus decades for their media to get this way. Because 2 decades ago, the BBC really was very well respected throughout the world. A decade ago, CTV was quite well respected. CBC's never been, well, no, in the 70s, they were really well respected. And Toronto Red Star, nobody's ever thought anything of the Toronto Red Star. And Global has always been about the NDP and unions. So, you know, you've always known their bias. But the point is, these media outlets should not be pushing their bias. They should be, if they are reporting the news, they should report the news without spin, without agenda, without bias, without partisanship. Tell the truth, tell the whole story, and let the viewership or listeners or readers decide for themselves, armed with all the facts. Like, I live in a very left-wing city here in Canada, and let me tell you, I talk to these people and they have no bleeping clue what they're talking about most of the time. They really don't, because they're uninformed. They're uninformed voters. One guy I know, he's like going on and on. I'm going like, do you not understand what's happening with your news outlets? And he goes, well, I don't watch the news. I'm like, well, how can you say you don't watch the news, but then have opinions on politics and world events? He's like, well, no, I don't watch the news. And I'm like, but he's like, I want to sleep at night, therefore I don't watch the news. And it's like, how can you form opinions? And he's got really heavy opinions about Trump and about Polyev and about, you know, about everything. But according to him, he doesn't watch the news. Now, he's lying. Obviously, he watches CBC and CTV and Global, but he didn't want to admit that because even he knows how partisan and biased they are. And the BBC in the States or in the UK is no different. CNN and MSNBC, New York Times, PBS, there's a whole bunch of other ones, NCR, they're the same thing in the States, you know, and they, just like in Canada, just like in the UK, those outlets, when the Democrats were in power, were funded by the Democrats. So these are not media outlets. These are state propaganda outlets. And that's what the BBC has been in the UK. So I'm not sad to see the BBC going through this trouble. I hope whoever they decide to take over for the BBC comes on the side of fairness, journalism, honesty. That would be my hope. Because I don't want a right-wing BBC and I don't want a left-wing BBC. Just like in Canada, I don't want right-wing and left-wing journalism. I want journalism. Journalism that has not existed since the 1970s and the 1980s, if we're being really honest. So anyway, that's my video for today. If you like this video, leave a like, a subscribe, and a share. I'm trying to grow my channel, and a like, a subscribe, and a share does me wonders, and I do appreciate it. Takes 1 second to subscribe, costs you absolutely nothing, helps me immensely. Just hit the subscribe button on the bottom of the screen. Always feel free to leave a comment. Please, I encourage everybody to leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Do you think this is going to change anything at all? Do you think it's going to change nothing? What are your hopes? What are your dreams for this? Let me know. Also, leaving a comment really does help me with the YouTube algorithm and getting more eyes on my videos. And as always, pew, 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 and shit. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye.